I want to talk to you a little bit about change. How many of you like change? Yeah, so how many of you are going on vacation this year to a different place than you went last year? Yeah, you like change. Look at that. Yeah. How many of you like to be changed? That's not so easy. Not so easy. How many of you have ever had the experience in your life where suddenly everything changed and nothing was quite the same? That you were barreling along doing what you thought you should be doing, that everything was going really well, and then all of a sudden the landscape shifted. Things then were completely different. You didn't have a map. Looks like almost everybody. Maybe it's happening every day, right? Could be happening every day. Let me tell you a story. When I was 27, I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and my wife, who's Dutch, Emily, came over here to the Netherlands, and she was meeting with her family. And while I was there in our apartment at about 2 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang, and she said, "Tom, I think I'm pregnant." There I was, 27 years old, young consultant, Boston Consulting Group, really knew that I was on my way and the world shifted. And I said, "How do you know?" And she said, "Well, I don't know. I have to do one of those tests. I'm going to get on my bike and I'm going to, listen, I'll call you back in a few hours." And she hung up. And there I was for the next 4 hours. I didn't sleep. And then she called back and she said, "It's blue." Somebody knows what that means. I didn't know. "Blue? What do you mean blue?" She said, "I'm pregnant." And I tell you, I walked out that door in my home a few hours later, and suddenly I saw baby carriages, and I saw pregnant women, and I saw toys. Everything I looked at was different. Everything I saw had changed. Now, that was a long time ago, but it led me to think a lot about, in the intervening years, about how is it that we're really dealing with shocks and transformations. We've heard a lot today, right, about chaos, about the need to look back to the dinosaurs and go forward to the future. But how do we really work with those shocks and surprises? How do we deal with those things? Well, my colleague Jim Keen and I have spent a lot of years thinking about this question. That's why we wrote a book about it. And it's not easy, but if we focus a little bit on some of the ways that leaders work through some of these issues, what we might figure out, just maybe, is that in between that point of something happening and that point of impact, we have a lot more time than we think we do, right? Volvo always used to say this. Used to say, cars, you could determine whether the crash was going to be a bad one from the moment of surprise to the moment of impact. If that got bigger, you had a better chance. I think that goes for how we deal with change as well, and surprises in our lives. This is something that I've really tried to study and understand and work with, and I think there are about 4 different things that we can pay attention to. Yeah? Only 4. Can you remember 4 things? Should be easy, right? Okay. So the first one that's pretty straightforward when something happens to you is pause, right? Just stop, pause. Then connect, then reflect, then reframe. Now those each have specific meanings for me, and I'll say a little bit about that. So when we talk about pausing, it seems kind of absurd that in the middle of a crash, we're pausing, right? It's completely counterintuitive. We're all taught fight or flight or freeze, right? That's what the psychologists say. Well, I think in our repertoire, we can find this moment of pause where we simply breathe, where we simply say, take it all in, breathe. I once had this moment when I was going to get really angry at my daughter. Teenager. Any of you have teenagers? Yeah? Any of you, well, you look like teenagers. What am I talking about? This is, Any of you ever been a teenager? I can ask that. Yeah, good. Okay. So we know what happens, right? All kinds of things happening. And Nadine saw that I was going to get really angry at her. She provoked something in me. And at that moment, just as I was about to hold forth, she said, "Stop." And I was shocked. I kind of wheeled back and I said, "What?" And she said, "I know what you're going to do. I've seen it before. First, you're going to get really angry at me, and then you're going to feel really bad about yourself. And then you're going to apologize to me." She said, "Go straight to the apology." I did exactly what you just did. I just started laughing. That pause shifted me out of my thinking and made me think, wait, maybe there's something else that I could be doing at this moment. So that's the pause, if you think about that. Then connect. Now, this is also counterintuitive, to connect. But quite often when we're in a surprise situation, what we want to do is we want to retreat, right? That first story I told you, I wanted to crawl back in bed and put, the covers over my head. We tend to not want to step into something, but we need to connect. But connect in a particular way. We need to see the wider landscape that we're facing. So we need to get a bigger picture of what's going on, and connecting starts with noticing the surround. I noticed Joop, our MC tonight, has done a really great job of kind of taking us to that wider place. Right? That was very helpful when all the technology stopped working, right? So, right, he connected back with you, and it was okay. And that we could do something with that. We could work with that. So, really important to find that connect point and to see that as an important step. But not only connect with the outside, but connect with others and connect with yourself. Right? This is what Robert Greenleaf called listening to the quiet voice inside of you. Right? So if you connect with yourself, you go to the next step, which is to reflect. So if we reflect, again, we're talking about small amounts of time now. In the reflection, what's so interesting is that we have to start asking questions. So this is not reflecting in a pool or in a mirror. This is really reflecting on what's happening here, what surprises me, what stands out for me. What am I seeing? What am I observing? So the reflection is in the reflection inventory of the questions that we're asking and the way that we ask those questions. I have a friend who observes teams in Afghanistan and who are working on trauma, where you have soldiers coming in the middle of disasters. It really is chaos. And one of the things he said is that they've developed a way that one person steps out and grasps the whole and sees what's going on and says, what's happening here? What needs to shift? What action has to take now? Do we have to take now? And in those moments, having somebody that has an understanding of the whole, it really helps. I like to think of it a bit like Columbo. Do you remember the old detective? He would be asking questions and then he would just walk away and then he would, one more question. And it's that one more question that sometimes is the one that helps us to see something different. So if you've been able to pause, and that takes a lot of courage in a moment to pause, if you've been able to suddenly connect then deeply with others and with yourself, and if you've then been able to reflect on what's standing out in the situation, there's one more thing to do, and that last thing is perhaps the most critical one for all the things that we've been talking about over the course of today, because it relates very much to how we're going to deal with big crises as well as small crises. And it's to reframe. Literally, reframing means to step out of the frame and to see another perspective and to notice that perspective. And in reframing, which is not, again, an easy thing to do, we have to look through different lenses at the situation we're in. I love this story about Anthony Hopkins when he was asked, how do you how do you do all these actors? You can do Hannibal Lecter on the one hand, and you can do the English butler on the other hand. Do you study each of those parts? He said, no. He said, they're all in me. They're all in me. I have to pull them out and use them at the right moment. I have to use them at the right moment. And in a sense, these aren't separate people, right? Anthony Hopkins isn't separate people. He's all one person. And this goes against our education, because our education teaches us that, that's the philosopher, and that's the pediatrician, and that's the person who's going to study science, and those are the, we love these reductionist boxes. But in moments of crisis, we have to have this seamless sense of ourselves and how we connect with that outside world. Just makes sense, right? So we start out by pausing, then we're able to connect, then we can reflect, then we can reframe. So what's all this going to be good for? How can this really help us? Well, you probably already got the message if you can remember those 4 things. It's so important to see that as agents of change, most of the time I've seen leaders in crunch situations not doing these things, any one of them quite often, and stepping into a situation thinking they know what they're doing, thinking they understand what the group is all about, thinking that they can take command and control. And we don't live in that world anymore, do we? We're really not in a world that people will respond very much to that kind of thinking. So we've got to find these different ways that we can step up and step in. Because there is no way back once we get into that moment of truth. I have a little sign on my desk. It's been there for about 15 years, actually, if I'm honest. And it says, the only way out is always through. And that's my message to you tonight. Thank you.